think we slipped through the net of goth, really. The holes were too big to catch us. There's other people do that a lot better. Probably with a lot less humour, perhaps.
This changed things.
Good God, what I would have accomplished if I hadn't been listening to that record all the time.
They didn't invent a goth movement.
Not by a long shot.
Oh my God, what on earth is the music going to sound like?
Sorry, but you can't wear that makeup. You'll scare people.
It sounded like nothing else. It sounded like it was a tortured scream coming up from the bottom of a deep, dark well. I think if Jim Morrison had lived 20 years longer, he would be as lucky to be as fat and charismatic as Robert Smith has been.
Do I look like somebody who would be qualified to sit here and talk to you about The Cure?
Right, okay, can you be quiet? This is the serious bit.
The word goth came about when a journalist wrote in the NME about Joy Division's debut album. They referred to it as having a gothic sound. It wasn't a kind of a goth movement or anything like that. It was just a one-off comment that that journalist had made at that particular time that later got, of course, turned into a whole subculture.
I've never really liked what's, you know, like your idea of goth music. It's always seemed to me pretty dirgy, but I think it goes beyond that, why people identify with the group. It's more to do with the attitude than wearing black, I think.
If you look at how they looked in 79, 80, 81, I mean, they just looked like kids. They didn't really look any different than, you know, they weren't all punk rocked out like the Pistols or the Clash. They kind of just looked like pretty average individuals. I don't think you could look at them and say, oh, there's goth right there.
And I wouldn't even say that it sounded remotely goth, and the band themselves didn't even look like goths at that stage. Robert Smith had short brown hair, they were walking around with this very kind of mismatched image, and it's for exactly that reason that Fiction Recordings chose to have a very strange cover for Three Imaginary Boys, showing three, well, rather mundane household appliances.
The front of the album had a picture of a Hoover, a fridge and a lamp, and on the back, instead of actually a track listing, there were just lots of little pictures.
It was guitar-driven pop that had drawn from certain aspects of punk rock, but mostly they wrote pop songs. Catchy pop songs, and it's an element to the Cure's career that has been a constant, despite being perceived as the ultimate goth band.
You know, they've always successfully had a pop feel without compromising who they are.
We started off as a really dumb pop group when we did Three Imaginary Boys and Boys Don't Cry.
I would say I'm sorry if I thought that it would change your mind, but I know that this time I have said too much, been too unkind.
Boys Don't Cry was definitely something that probably hit the hardcore Cure fan across the face like being in North America, like a hockey stick.
That will always be, you know, a perfect pop song, a perfect pop song. And that brought in a whole, to use the word tenderness, maybe, a softer side of the punk rock movement as well. You know, boys have feelings. Which, you know, when you had the posturing of Johnny Rotten and the, you know, it was a pretty revolutionary stance.
I think that it was the beginning of the pop side of The Cure. It was definitely the beginning of something new for that band.
You thought we were a pop band? Well, think again.
I have to say, actually, from the beginning, I got into The Cure in 1980 when they released their second album, 17 Seconds, and the track that I heard first was A Forest. When I hear it on the radio, it still sends shivers, makes all the what little hair I have stand up on end.
I think A Forest is the first indication in the Cure's canon of music that you know, this was an avenue that they were going to pursue, and obviously it's an avenue that's very appealing to that gothic crowd.
Mike Hedges produced 17 Seconds for The Cure. What he managed to do with that album was explore a much darker side.
The Cure managed also to separate the pop from the bleak, and for some reason it worked. A lot of bands, people would have went, what the hell is this, and forgotten all about them. But The Cure managed to do it so well, the fans stuck with them.
Most of the people that we meet that really like the group like us for the same reasons, and it is to do with attitude and the way that we do what we want, and that we don't really, I don't know, we don't sort of follow any pattern. We're quite an unpredictable group.
With this album, what was interesting, 17 Seconds, is exactly that Hedges sort of just wanted to, you know, he could see much more depth in Robert Smith and just wanted to dig in there a bit, and they just sort of went at it in you know, an ad hoc type of way.
A Forest is definitely the best track on 17 Seconds, but there's a good argument to say it's possibly the best track the Cure have ever recorded. It
was a big departure from the other songs that the Cure had actually been releasing. It's their first kind of long single.
They weren't afraid to pursue a gothic sound. I mean, you can draw comparisons, I think, with The Forest and with Bauhaus's Bela Lugosi's Dead, in the way that they used quite stark build-ups to sort of reach their sort of quite intense climactic points.
I think it just opened up a whole new kettle of fish for the band. It may have been drug influenced, who knows, but for whatever reason, I think the whole, I think they found space, physical space, in their music a little more.
It's a great piece of music for starters, and yes, it's the sort of first indication of a goth band or a goth side to the Cure lurking within their framework.
think there was just a whole lot more experimentation coming on.
17 Seconds, it was a case of, I think that Robert had found the niche of music he wanted to write. As I sort of said before, Three Imaginary Boys did sort of like show that, you know, there was quite a lot of seriousness to his music. So yes, I mean, things like The Forest, Faith and Pornography were written very much sort of like, you know, teenage angst. There was a lot of talk about Robert being the new Ian Curtis because, you know, of the way that the music was going. 17 Seconds was sort of like the light version of this.
It was around this time that Robert Smith actually developed his trademark look. The story goes he'd started dabbling around with some quite hard drugs at the time. He was dabbling about with some opiums, a lot of hallucinogenic stuff, and they went to a bit of a do following a birthday party gig. That was Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Originally that was the band that he was in. And very high on opium, Robert Smith decided to borrow some of Susie Sue's makeup and apply it to his face. And because he was so completely out of his head, of course it went a bit wonky. But somewhere along the line, Robert Smith must have thought, yeah, this is a really great idea, I'm going to stick with this. Perhaps that was the look that he was trying to achieve all this time. He'd started to borrow quite a lot of inspiration from Steve Severin from the Banshees as well, starting to look like him, wearing the same shades, wearing a lot of crucifixes. So he was already starting to get an image, and as an album, Pornography reflected that image.
Well, it's up to him as an individual. He's, you know, the way Robert Smith looks has got nothing to do with the music he makes. That's something that's placed upon him by the media and by his fans.
I think really that the English media does have a problem with a group like us because we don't fit in, and we don't go away. I mean, they just find us really irritating. I can understand why, because we've sort of disregarded everything, and so we're still able to do what we want. So we're sort of we irritate people.
Robert Smith really did develop his style as a frontman massively through the 80s. When you consider what he looked like when he first started in The Cure to what he looked like circa 84, 85 with the big hair and this wild makeup and this sort of slightly, if you like, kind of almost deranged personality. Not that he was deranged, but that was the personality that he portrayed in a lot of the videos. Those are all very strong things for a frontman, things that people can identify with. Certainly his hair and makeup, I would say, had a massive, massive impact. I would suggest that if it wasn't for that, they might not have actually done so well. A lot of record labels, music journalists, even fans themselves want someone with a strong, identifiable image to actually latch onto. Robert Smith had that image. In terms of the actual musical performance, his vocals were very distinctive. You would hear a Cure song on the radio, even if you didn't maybe know the song, you would know that it was the Cure because of those vocals. It's another very important thing for any frontman to have, is this very distinctive vocal style, and Robert Smith had that.
I'm still very, very limited. I get very frustrated when I hear good singers, but it's just funny. It's such an embarrassing thing to do, sing. Like, I couldn't sing now. I jump in the river rather than sing. But if I'm sort of, I don't know, in a certain frame of mind and I'm singing songs, it's a release, I suppose.
I think that you find there's a great empathy between Smith and his fans, which should never be underestimated. You know, I mean, Cure fans, very passionate about about the band in the same way sort of Smiths fans were passionate about the Smiths, because there was a huge empathy between Morrissey and the fans, and the Cure have that, and it's something that Smiths never let go.
Well, his image certainly doesn't hurt him. You know, I mean, he was, you know, this little scrawny kid who came from Crawley, England in the mid '70s, started this band with a couple of friends, and gradually evolved into this figure which had the hair all over the place and the messed up lipstick and the white makeup, you know, taking elements of the goth scene, yet still staying with the lipsticks, you know, making it all smudged as opposed to what everybody else does, make it picture perfect, kind of creating his own image and creating his own sound. Now his voice, to me, is his strength. Not only what he says, but the way he sings it.
He just gets by. He's kind of like a sort of a slightly sort of cynical cat that sort of stays on stage and kind of looks out and lets people in when he wants them to come in.
I think part of the reason for the endurance of the Cure is the fact that Robert Smith has consistently written great songs. I mean, he may not have managed to collect, you know, a whole group of them all the time for every album, but you know, the Cure haven't made a wholly bad record ever. Most of their albums are above average to very, very good.
He's sort of a kind of minimalist, and it's sort of like he's not going to really do very much. There may be only sort of 5 points in the show where all he'll do is he might just run towards the drum kit. That would be a huge event. Whereas you sort of tend to find most sort of frontmen, they're running around the stage an awful lot, and they're working the audience the whole time. Robert's almost like kind of sort of disengaged from the audience. He's not really looking at them, he's just staring out quite manically.
It's about identity, and the identity of the Cure is unmistakably and unshakably Robert Smith.
When Faith first came out, it was around the time that Robert Smith had stopped touring with Susie and the Banshees. I think he thought maybe that, you know, he'd kissed that band goodbye, but he would still carry on being friends with them. Little did he know that they would later feature in his life.
Faith was written around the death of the drummer's mother, which is why it's got such a funereal feel to it.
There was this theme of death that was very, very strong among the Cure, I suppose, if you like, the Cure family, whatever you want to call it, the Cure group. And that really affected the way that Robert Smith was thinking and the way that he was writing. So there's this very strong death theme in there. So if you like, it's getting a little bit more towards the gothic end of the spectrum. It's getting darker, the music is getting slower, the songs are getting a lot longer as well. Already it's moving further towards finding the Cure's niche.
Most Cure fans will own this record. In fact, almost for sure they will. It's regarded as their magic three: the 17 Seconds, Pornography, and Faith.
I think it's a very it's a stark album. It's quite depressing, but then again, it's got a track like Charlotte Sometimes on it. It's, you know, it's sort of, again, it's sort of that sort of poppier element, even if it's sort of bit sort of morbid. I mean, like the sleeve, very grey sleeve, very grey kind of sound. The kind of thing that, you know, sort of goths will pick up upon, but it's, again, I wouldn't call it a goth album.
The title track Faith is considered to be one of there are some songs people sort of say, or some Cure fans say, oh, I love that song, oh, I hate that song, I love that song, I hate that song. Faith, I don't think I've ever met anybody who doesn't like the song. One of the things about the Cure, and one of the reasons why they are so popular, is because a lot of people feel the band are just playing for you. They're not playing for anybody else. You can be at a concert, 10,000 people. I remember seeing them in Wembley in 1989, and I was with a friend of mine who'd not really seen them before, and they played Faith at the end. And my friend was looking at all the security guards, and the security guards were sort of like a little bit perplexed, I think was probably a good word, because the entire audience just stood and stared at Robert, because everybody feels that he's playing that song just for them.
this album is very much a Cure classic, and I'd say that all die-hard Cure fans own it and love it, and yeah, it's a very good piece of work, and I think it was the sort of template for their very successful career during the 80s.
It's part of a process that's leading up to Pornography, which is the album that follows it, where all of a sudden, you know, the Cure hit you with like, my God, what is this, and where has it come from? It's a very it's a dense, depressing, you know, it's a goth album. You know, from a band who weren't up until that point a goth band, and I stress didn't remain a goth band, but could make goth albums.
Pornography is probably the hardcore Cure fans' favorite album. This is probably the album that, if you're a fan of The Cure, this is the one that does it for you.
I love it because of its intensity, and it really is. I mean, it's hard work. It's very hard work. But when you first heard that album, it knocked you for six because you hadn't really heard anything like it before.
I think it's probably regarded, to my ears, it's their sort of bleakest, sort of darkest album, and I think that's why it's sort of almost held up as a kind of template to goth music.
If you put that up against what are perceived as classic goth albums, it's totally different. You know, it's nothing like, you know, the sort of sound that the Sisters of Mercy had that would be appropriated by a band like, say, Fields of the Nephilim, and it's nothing like the more artistic side of things that like Bauhaus were doing. It's dense, it's awkward, it's, you know, deliberately awkward. You know, you have to listen to it to find the tunes in there, but you do listen to it. It's a very appealing album, draws you in. It's very seductive. You know, because again, it's a goth album being made by a band who weren't strictly a goth band.
I was just looking at the date of it again, and it's 1982, I believe, and to me, to think of that record coming out at that time, you know, only 3 or 4 years removed from the first record, I think it's, you know, I think it's a massive step over that time. I think Pornography was a brilliant record.
When we had the album titled Pornography, we weren't going to write songs about, you know, child sex. It was just called Pornography because it gave us a sense, you know, we discussed the idea of pornography, and we had a, you know, that word has connotations, and it coloured the record.
There was a Faith tour in the autumn of '81 to promote the Charlotte Sometimes single, and they started playing early versions of Pornography. And unfortunately, with the Pornography tour and the way that the music left the entire band and audience drained on stage, the band unfortunately imploded in Germany in the summer of 1982.
I'm always prepared for it to end. I get very disillusioned very quickly with never sort of feeling that we've achieved anything. It's like you know, I'm always discontent. So I always think we should, you know, that we're not really getting anywhere, we're not doing anything. And also I'm like just dramatic by nature.
They were asked by a BBC TV show, the Oxford Road Show, to perform Let's Go to Bed live. And Robert sort of got there and decided, no, I'm not going to play what they want me to play, and he played 2 tracks off the Pornography album and realised how much he loved playing and writing. So therefore he went off and wrote the top.
I don't care. If only I could say that, and I feel so sick and scared.
It takes a real lot of effort to stir the monster that is the Cure nowadays. You know, we all met up and I say to the others, do you think we should do another record? And everyone goes, yeah. And we do, and everything just sort of picks up again.
Jesus, brilliant, you used to love walking this gorgeous block.
lot of the drugs that he was taking played a pretty strong part in a lot of the songs. There are several album tracks on that and B-sides that were written around the same time, which chronicle a lot of his use with hallucinogenic drugs.
When we're in the studio, we have guidelines of what we're going to do, and then we play, and that's how it turns out. I mean, that's the idea of being in a group. The idea of being in a group isn't to make a record that you feel will somehow promote your image or change your image or something. But that's what you want to be seen as. I mean, whatever we've done through the years, we've done because that's what we want to do. And sometimes it's worked, and sometimes it hasn't. And it's that side of it. If you start to control every aspect of what you do, you lose all the sort of the spark of originality, really.
Piggy in the Mirror was one of the album filler tracks that Robert Smith wrote whilst very heavily under the influence of drugs. It was written about drugs. It was quite a stark contrast to the novelty album of Japanese Whispers. If you like, it was the first proper Cure album after Japanese Whispers. So if you want to regard being on a lot of drugs as a more mature sound, then perhaps it was.
At this sort of stage, there wasn't really much of a band. It was really just sort of like him and Lol Tolhurst, who was the drummer, who was sort of still with him. But basically, the bassist he got into play when they toured it was Phil Thornley, who'd produced Pornography, and then who essentially was at that stage a session drummer, Andy Anderson. So it wasn't really, it was probably more of a Robert solo album.
I don't think all the group feels as strongly about my obsessions as I do. They're not as fixated as I am. Otherwise it'll all be right in the words, and I can have a holiday.
It's a pretty dark, sort of desolate track. It opens with a sort of very hypnotic bass figure that sort of keeps repeating throughout. It's quite sort of depressing. It's not sort of happy bass playing by any means. So it's not the kind of track you're going to sort of play at breakfast time and sort of to start your day off sort of right. It's sort of quite almost got a sort of slightly suicidal vibe about it. So this sort of bass, quite menacing bass opens the track and it just stays there.
With the top breaking, you know, top 10 unexpectedly, I think, probably just give Robert Smith the pat on the back to go for himself personally, to think, yeah, I'm right just to write the way I want to write.
For a band who, up until this point, had kind of been chopping and changing their approach, everything would come to a head, if you'll excuse the pun, with head on the door. They would define themselves completely, and then they were up and running and really away as a mature band. But they were still finding their feet in certain musical areas with the top, which is why I don't think it works overall as an album.
A lot of people were surprised when The Cure first started entering sort of the top 10, the pop charts. You know, the sort of music press wanted to know a lot more about Robert Smith's personal life as soon as he was appearing regularly in the charts. So maybe it's a little bit of him going like that to, you know, saying, listen, I can write kind of a top 10 record like that if you really want to know, and here it is. And it's still got sort of a degree of integrity, and it's still got a musicality that others lack.
Right, by the time The Cure released Head on the Door, they were headlining Wembley Arena. That gives you some kind of indication of how big they were in the UK. Right, they were also about to break in America, where they became even bigger. They were, at this point, and would be for a long time, a stadium rock band. Now, they didn't have a stadium rock sound, but they were of that level. They could, you know, they were that popular.
1985 saw one of the, I actually remember being delighted by this. 1985 saw the return of Simon Gallup to the Cure fold. We were also joined by Paul Thompson, who'd played with the band before they became the Cure. He's actually Robert's brother-in-law. Sort of like the Head on the Door album that came out in 1985 is one of the perfect Cure albums, in that it has the pop side of it, has things like In Between Days and Close to Me.
Close to Me was a pure Cure song to me. You know, it's delicate. You know, again, simple bass line, simple guitar overlay. You know, his vocal is really gentle and you know, I just think it has all the qualities which I personally enjoy about The Cure in these softer moments.
That's where everything, you know, it's the defining moment in The Cure's career. From that point, they're up and running, and they don't look back.
Well, Close to Me is another song like Let's Go to Bed and like Boys Don't Cry that essentially showed the poppier side of the band. I don't think that, I think if anything, that was their most pop song. That was the song that could have probably made it on AM radio back in the 80s, and the kids and their mothers would have liked it as well, because it's quirky, it's catchy, lyrically it's brilliant, and it just fit with the way they looked, the way they acted, and where the band was at that time.
It was perhaps indicative of what later The Cure started doing when they started with an album called All Mixed Up, which was basically a remix album. Again, they dabbled with this dance sound. So I think it really showed the direction The Cure were heading in, and this kind of interest that they wanted to experiment with different sounds. It's actually quite interesting because a lot of the bands that came out of that post-punk goth scene, they did start using dance and experimental dance towards the kind of 90s end, and I don't know why they did that, but there's been an awful lot that have actually used it, that they've almost seen dance as being the new punk. It's another way of being able to express yourself, so perhaps that was what Robert Smith was thinking of as well.
I really like the Cocktail Twins, I really like Mozart, I really like Paula Abdul. You know, it's supposing that people can only like one type of music, and it's wrong. I mean, people like lots of different types. I mean, you'd have to be like the most dull person in the world to only listen to one type of music. So what we do is just we do what we feel like.
Whereas the Head in the Door album is obviously very, very, very loved and very kind of favoured by The Cure, and I think it's probably that The Cure's audience by that time, by 1985, started to grow up a little bit. You know, they'd been sort of around the sort of 16, 17, 18 mark. You know, sort of in 1979, 1980, they were now like 24, 25. They was already sort of had to make decisions. You know, finish university or whatever, get jobs. So I think the band, the audience had grown with the band, and sort of it culminated in the Head in the Door album. I think the Kiss Me album was purely probably because they had to do an album. Sort of, you know, it was 2 years after the Head in the Door album. You know, the record company called for an album. They needed an album to tour. So I think they sort of just not went through the motions, but delivered a proficient, sort of professional sounding album, and it got put out, and I think that's the situation.
And the Kiss Me album was supposed to be like a showcase almost of things that we can do, and it was like a record you would really listen to you could listen to with other people.
Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is a double album that The Cure put out, and I think if you looked at the numbers as a record rep, or as a member of the record industry at their label, you would probably say that Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me was a far stronger album from The Cure, because it had songs like Just Like Heaven, which was a big hit for the band in North America, Hot, 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 which was sort of their, the only way I can describe Hot, Hot, Hot is sort of their Jamaican English influence. I don't even know if that makes any sense, but that album I thought was a little long-winded as a fan of the band. I thought if it was a single album, it probably would have been their best album, but because it wasn't, I think their best was still yet to come.
Being a double album, there were some tracks on it which I feel could have been left off. It would have made a fantastic single album. I mean, there's the great Why Can't I Be You single, The Beauty of Catch. There is Just Like Heaven, which I would probably say is one of the finest guitar pop singles ever written.
Head on Door was a very reflective album written post Smith's nervous breakdown. So Kiss Me was almost like coming out of that, and I think that he was, maybe the whole band were a little bit not so sure where now to head. They'd started dabbling with the dancey sort of stuff a little bit ahead of their time, really. It wasn't, I don't think that people were quite ready for that. So now it was like, well, maybe we should just move back slightly and try and do something that's a little bit more subdued, maybe a little bit less experimental. Now, in terms of commerciality, maybe that would be a better move because that kind of stuff is going to sell more. But for the fans' perspective, it wasn't The Cure. It was The Cure not being as they had been, not experimenting with things, not coming up with these sort of rather melancholic tracks.
From an outsider looking in, I think that Disintegration was a very dark time for The Cure.
Broken bonds, old lies, opportunities, belated sort of realizations, you know, sort of, I think so. You know, anyone who's loved and lost and maybe found love again will identify with sort of, you know, various key elements in this record. So I think it's sort of, he's realized that there is a universality about sort of life, and almost the secret of songwriting is sort of exposing your soul enough to let people get a glimpse inside, and then they can kind of relate to your experiences, those human emotions.
Like songs like Pictures of You and Last Dance are more their obsession and fixation, and not really love. It's not love like in Love Song. Love Song's the only one that actually sort of is about the love that exists between two people in a real way. All the other songs aren't. They're actually about the lack of love, if anything.
It was a funny record. It was a funny record. They were just starting to make it in the States big time. And yes, Robert Smith was again falling apart. So, yeah, I guess autobiographical, but maybe in a bit more of a tabloid, let's watch the person's demise, personal demise kind of a way.
Disintegration, I think, was in some ways the pinnacle of what Robert had been looking to achieve. It's considered by a number of Cure fans to be the definitive Cure album.
I think with a song like Lullaby, for example, you know, again, it has such a warmth and a depth to it. You know, Robert Smith's never been emotionally constrained. You know, he's always been able to express himself much more than a lot of artists, and unashamedly, he seems to wear it all on his sleeve.
Spider-Man comes softly through the shadow of the evening sun, stealing past the windows.
Lullaby is Robert Smith's sensitive side coming out again. I hope that doesn't sound wrong, but I mean, you know, we all have sensitive sides. Some people choose to show it, some people don't. And Robert has never had a problem with that, I don't think. A lullaby is a lullaby. That was why it was titled the way it's titled. I mean, that's essentially what it is. You take a man who sings the way he does, which cannot be described until you actually hear him sing. The way he sings, it was like the perfect song. It almost reminds me of a song that somebody gave him and said, you know what, I wrote this song, I think this is perfect for you, but somehow Robert managed to pull it out of his head, or wherever he pulls his music out from, and he made this song that was just this beautiful piece that you could play for the Cure fan that had been there for 10 years, say, was in their 30s now, had a daughter, had a son, whatever, little baby, could play them before they went to bed. You know what I mean? It's such a beautiful song.
The song Lullaby is probably one of the most disturbing songs that The Cure's ever written. It's this wonderfully creepy, it's just, for me, it is just the most goth song that they've ever written. Smith's vocals in it are just, it's almost like he's really enjoying doing this song and he's making it sound as creepy as possible.
It's too late to get away. Turn on the light. The Spider-Man is having you for dinner tonight.
Obviously the Spider-Man is just like a kind of a bogeyman character, really. He stands for, it's symbolic of various things. I was trying to sort of disguise various phobias. It's just sometimes when your fear of going to sleep because you don't think you'll ever wake up again, that you have, particularly when you're young, you know, you get, sometimes sleep can be really welcoming, and it can be a sort of a reprieve from from day-to-day life, and other times it can be, you know, if you get into a pattern, which I've been in from time to time, of nightmares that you really dread falling asleep. You try and keep yourself awake at all costs. And it's just about that. It's just about the last time that happened to me. But the Spider-Man's a very thinly disguised analogy of various phobias that I have.
He sort of sings like the inner child in all of us. I think that's the best way to describe it, you know? He sort of manages to whine without it being annoying, if that makes sense. And I think that he has such an original sound to his voice that only for some reason, I find anyway, that bands in the 80s and 90s managed to create very, very well for themselves, to kind of segregate themselves from other bands. But The Cure used their image, they used their sound, Robert uses the style of the way he sings to make it such an individual band. It's such a band that stands out from any other bands, even in the same genre.
They were never afraid to try anything. And you've always got to admire an artist who is never afraid to try anything, especially when they get away with it most of the time, which The Cure did.
Either you relate or you don't relate, and The Cure were always one of those bands that managed to relate to their fans. Out of that era, very few bands, I think, came out of that era, the late 70s, early 80s, and managed to continually write songs that made people want to come to them.
I think that The Cure were always progressing, and I think once they got to the point where they had tapped what they could out of a direction, I think that there was always a willingness to change direction, start again, take that to its logical extreme, and once they felt they had said everything they could with that, to move on to the next one. The decisions may be questionable. They may get to a point where, like with Pornography, maybe there might have been, maybe they could have gone deeper and darker, and you know, maybe they could have put some of their own blood in with the vinyl. Which, but you know, they made their decisions, they moved on, and I think that that's been a great hallmark for them in their career.
And they're very unique. You know, there isn't a band like The Cure. You know, they're called a goth band, but they're not a goth band. You know, Robert Smith, I don't think would ever call himself a goth. He'd just say, well, I'm me, you know, it's just the way I look, and it just happens to be a look that a lot of people have copied because they like the band that I'm in. You know, they've consistently made good music. You can't have a go at a band who consistently make good music. You know, and they could write the most intense, difficult to get into rock song, and they could write the most charming, poignant and enjoyable pop song, and they can have both on an album. And you know, and you never listen to any of their records and think, well, that's a bit odd, what's that doing there? You just accept The Cure for what they are.
I don't know what Robert Smith at 50 will be. I don't know how much pain and heartache, you know, these men can take and put into their art. At a certain point, you do just want them to write happy love songs for the rest of their life because you want them to be happy and in love. I think that they've deserved it. I think they've given us enough pain.
On an intellectual level as well, they were quite clever. They didn't just haphazardly do an album and then go on to. I think they've thought really carefully when to make and then release an album, when to tour it, where to tour it, how to tour it. I think their real winning combination is that I think they always come down to that less is more. So they never do too much, even when they could afford it. You know, the tours are never over the top. It's never a huge stage set, never a huge stage show. When the albums come out, there is a fanfare, of course, to announce the album. They've never relied on sort of gadgets or gimmicks or, you know, gone with marketing trends. It's like essentially you're getting The Cure. It's not for sort of people that live in the mainstream.
It sounds very easy to say that. It's like we could do better, but we don't want to. But it is actually, it's true in our case. I mean, there's so many things that we don't do that we should do to kind of establish ourselves even more and to capitalise on what we do. But really the idea of that kind of overwhelming fame in a way, I mean, not that it's ever likely we would get it, but it's has too many disadvantages, and we've been doing it too long to be taken in by the sort of the veneer of fame and what it brings. Because all it brings is trouble, really. It brings heartache. You know, you can't do anything ever again without people criticising you, basically, and looking at you all the time.
They don't come across as sort of like big pop stars. They do come across, I mean, they write music which is very personal to people.
That connection is something a lot of bands will never achieve.
I think if you look at The Cure, you know, 3 times unprecedented headliners at Glastonbury, you know, Brit Awards, Best Videos, you know, they have the industry recognition, but unashamedly and undoubtedly it is Robert Smith that is the focus and is The Cure. He wears the image, which is a mask, but allows him to then be personal. And I think if anybody ever wanted to know Robert Smith, or you wanted to know how he was feeling or what he'd experienced, then it's there. It's there in the discography. You know, go back from the very beginning, his school bands, his first project, winning a Battle of the Bands, and follow The Cure through. He leaves nothing hidden. It's all there. His emotional ride, his drug-induced psychedelia, his heartfelt emotion, his screaming, his angst. You know, it's all there. His happy moments. You know, it's in their catalogue.
I'm sure that whatever decision they make about what direction they want to go in will be the right decision. I'm sure it will astound, it will amaze, and it will always be The Cure.